It's a continuation of the Beatitudes. This one's called Rung by Rung, the Journey of the Beatitudes. Pastor Paul.
Well, good morning again, and I do apologize for not getting, I promise I sent it and it never made its way, and now I can't find it. But anyway, we're going to go old school today. We're going to have to actually open our Bibles up. Oh, we're not going old school today. We're gonna have it on the screen. It has. I pray that you will have a good weekend. It's already been a very long weekend for my family and I. Friday afternoon, after I got off work, my wife and kids, we loaded up and headed to Missouri. My wife's grandmother had her 90th birthday party, and she was very interested in the open church, and she says that she wants to come visit. So maybe this winter she will be able to be here. It was a very short weekend for me. You all call it a long weekend, but we left Friday afternoon. We got up there that night, got up Saturday morning, went to the birthday party, and I had hoped that I could leave Missouri at 3 o'clock. We left Missouri after 6 o'clock, which put me getting home this morning at 1 o'clock. So you read in the scriptures how the Lord revived the dead man. I need that this morning. But it was a joy also because where we had the birthday party was the church where Kara and I got married in. It was also the church that I preached my very first sermon 27 years ago. And I went and nothing has changed. The pulpit is still the same. The pews in the church are still the same. The only thing that's changed, they do have some different carpet. But it was kind of fun to be able to walk through memory lane while I was there and, reminisce. Well, this morning we are going to continue our journey in the Beatitudes. We're going to talk this morning about rung by rung. You've seen a ladder. You climb a ladder and it has rungs on it. I want you to know first off, last week we talked about how there were large crowds that were following Jesus. And it says that after he'd come out of Syria, went through Galilee, he goes up to this mountain that we call the mountain of the Beatitudes, and he finds a place to sit down. And once he is seated, then the disciples come to him, because the teacher was the one that sat down and the listeners were the ones that stood around him and listened. So we've come to that point, and the end of our sermon last week said he opened his mouth and began to teach, saying, well, this is what he said here this morning. So let's look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 through 6. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Jesus' everyday language that he walked around and spoke was Aramaic. Now, we have the New Testament given to us in Greek, but Jesus' language that he spoke was Aramaic. And the Aramaic and the Hebrew had a common saying that was used in both languages, and it was, "Oh, the blessedness." Oh, the blessedness. And David actually uses this in the very first psalm. When David comes, he begins to pen, he says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night." Jesus, in his powerful teaching here on the Sermon on the Mount, he uses this same beginning to each one of his messages. He says, "Blessed." Blessed. Or the way that the Greek translated it was, oh, how fortunate, oh, how happy is he, if we were to put it in today's language. Oh, the pure joy. Blessed. This was the Greek word makarios, and it means fortunate. G. Campbell Morgan wrote, he said, in the 3 chapters beginning here, we have the Magna Carta of the kingdom of God. The Sermon on the Mount opens with these Beatitudes. And what I would like to draw your attention to first is that notice that these are Beatitudes. They're not do-attitudes. They are Beatitudes. They're supposed to be what the subjects of the kingdom are to be. And then he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Back in the early 1900s, whenever Russia was trying to eradicate religion from the face of Russia, they began to put out a lot of propaganda type things that would cause people to look at Christianity with a critical scoffers type of view. And in Moscow, at one of the theaters in Moscow, there was this very famous actor by the name of Alexander Rostovtsev. And he was actually converted while doing a play in the early 1900s. In this play, it was a sacrilege play. It was blasphemous. And the play, we know it now as Christ in a Tuxedo, but it's also been called Christ in a Tailcoat and a Top Hat over the years. And what Alexander was supposed to do is he was supposed to read 2 verses from the Sermon on the Mount. And then he was supposed to remove his gown and cry out, "Give me a tuxedo and a top hat." And they were making fun of Jesus. But as he read the first 2 verses of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And history tells us that Alexander began to tremble. He began to shake, and he went silent. He didn't know what to do, and then he just kept on reading Matthew chapter 5. Eventually, the other actors in the play, they're behind the curtain, and they're whistling at him, and they're clicking at him, they're snapping their fingers, they're tapping their feet, trying to get his attention. And he just keeps on reading. Finally, he gets to a point where he recalls a verse that he learned in his childhood at the Russian Orthodox Church. And he cried out, "Lord, remember me when thou comest into your kingdom." And before the curtain, they immediately wanted to drop the curtain, but before the curtain could even drop that night, Alexander Rostovtsev became a Christian in the public eye. In the public eye, where they were trying to scratch out Christianity. And I'd like to just point out this morning that when Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, this does not have anything to do about material poverty. This is about being poor in spirit. This is a stark contrast to pride. You look through Scripture and pride is mentioned so many times. It's one of the things that God even says that He hates. Scripture talks about how God will be against pride. Those that are haughty in spirit, He will be against. I don't want to do anything that causes God to be my enemy. But this concept is starkly contrasting against pride. And it naturally follows. Poor in spirit naturally follows a person whenever they have a genuine encounter with God. Being poor in spirit is something that just flows out of you whenever you truly meet God. Whenever you truly meet God, the immediate consequence of meeting God is that you understand and you sense your need of poverty in your life. You are able to acknowledge the humility and the lowliness of your state whenever you encounter God. If you ever run into someone who says that they've had an encounter with God, but yet they're prideful, they're arrogant, they're haughty, chances are that they truly didn't have a genuine encounter with God. It reminds me whenever Isaiah has his encounter with God. He writes in Isaiah chapter 6, he says, this is in the year that King Uzziah died. I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Then he said, Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among unclean people. This is the consequence of meeting God personally. The outcome of meeting God personally is being able to recognize that we are lost and undone. Isaiah cried out, Woe is me, I'm undone. Daniel had an encounter with the Lord. Daniel writes in chapter 10 and verse 8, he says, So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Peter had an encounter with the Lord. And in Luke chapter 5, when Peter had this encounter and he had a realization that he was in the presence of God, what does he say to Jesus? He says, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man. A genuine encounter with the Lord reveals a lot about oneself. Jesus pointed out that our errors oftentimes stem from trying to compare ourselves to one another. We try to compare to those around us. And whenever we look at other people and we use them as our benchmark and our judge of our righteousness, it's easy for us to say, well, I'm not as bad off as they are. I'm not as messed up as what they are. At least I'm not like them. Remember a few weeks back I said that we are very good at accusing others, and we're very good at excusing ourselves. Whenever we use man around us to be our benchmark, Jesus talks about that and says it's not wise that we do that. But when we compare ourselves to the holiness of God, we realize all of our shortcomings. And oftentimes we cry out, My God, help me. Help me, Lord. Paul writes about it in Romans chapter 7. He says, O wretched man that I am, who shall save me from this body of death? So the starting point for anyone is that they recognize their spiritual poverty. And the reason that the call for the poor in spirit is the first thing that is listed is because it takes the lead for everything that follows. These instructions aren't meant to be accomplished solely through our own power and our own might. These being poor in spirit is us recognizing that we are a beggar, our beggar status with God. You may have a big bank account, you may have a prosperous life, but spiritually, we're beggars. We do not possess anything in us that is good. We have to realize that we are a beggar and we rely upon God's strength, not our own. And the thing is, you can't have mourning until you first recognize your spiritual poverty. You can't talk about being meek in your life or having gentleness toward others without first recognizing our own humility. You can't acknowledge our own lack of insufficiency and pursue righteousness if we haven't first realized our inadequacy and our poverty of spirit. So this list of the Beatitudes is like a ladder. You've got to get on that first rung of the ladder, which is being poor in spirit before we can ascend to any of the other things. So how about you? Do you recognize this morning the state of your spiritual poverty? Then he moves on and he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." This Greek grammar here indicates that this is an intense state of mourning. This isn't casual sorrow. This is a deep grief over our fallen state before God. William Barclay is a Bible commentator that I've read for years, and he writes that the Greek word for to mourn used here is the strongest word for mourning in the Greek language. It's the word which is actually used as mourning for the dead, for the passionate lament of one who was loved. I don't know if you've ever been with someone as they pass from here to eternity, but I've been there and I've heard people wail. That's what Jesus is talking about here. As kingdom citizens, we have the ability to be able to feel deeply about our sin and the sin of others. And we should mourn over these types of things. A major problem with our society is that people don't want to feel pain at any level. So we create emotional and physical escapes to avoid pain. We give no room for suffering. We give no room for any type of a conflict in our theology because we want to avoid that. We wish for a spirituality that is absent of pain, absent of grief, absent of sorrow, of tragedy, of suffering. And the New Testament is loaded with suffering. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He invites us to bring our burdens to Him and to trust Him with our pain. And He promises us that if we will do this, you'll find rest. Then he moves on and he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." What do you think of whenever you hear the word meek? I personally think that this is a word that has been hijacked by society and redefined to describe someone who is weak. Someone who doesn't possess enough ambition to stand up. Someone who has no direction. They're just idling by. That's what I feel like society has kind of dumbed this word down to. A person who has no ambition, no guts, no will to do anything, just no opinion. They just go with the flow. And it's hard as a man and for other men to understand whenever Jesus talks about blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Men are hard, we have a hard time understanding this because it's a concept that we can't get our minds around. Men tend to believe in physical strength. Men believe in arms and armies and power. Men believe in craftiness of words and cunning. Men believe in energy, will, and perseverance. They believe in influencing their fellow man and persuading them, even if it means threats. or with pain or with fear. It's virtually impossible to translate this Greek word meek, which is praos, into the English word with just one word. But praos has the idea of having proper balance between anger and indifference, of a powerful personality, properly controlled, and one of humility. And I think one of the best definitions of meekness comes from Matthew Henry, the old Bible commentator. He says, "The meek are those who quietly submit to God, who can bear provocation without being inflamed by it." In this Greek language, the meek person was not someone who was easily pushed around, though. The idea of this word, meek, has the word picture of strength under control. It's like a strong stallion that is trained to do the job and not just running wild. That's what meek means. It's another way that you can look at a meek person is you probably are familiar with an assassin in the army. An assassin oftentimes will be perhaps a mile away, and he'll have someone in the crosshairs. He has the power at his disposal to take out whoever it is. And he gets a call and he says, "Stand down, soldier." That's a picture of meekness, with the ability to eliminate the enemy, but the restraint to not do it when commanded. He could annihilate his target. You can see how Jesus responded to Pontius Pilate. This is a great picture of meekness. Here we have the King of Kings standing before a borrowed governor, basically a mayor. You've got the King of Kings standing before a mayor on this tiny little piece of real estate. And there is no doubt that Jesus could have snapped his fingers and Pontius Pilate would have been done under. But he didn't. See, these first two attitudes, the first two Beatitudes, are inward types of things. This third one is going to talk about our relationship to fellow man. The first two were mainly negative. This one is a positive one. So then we move on. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Hunger and thirst are extremely powerful forces. When a person is hungry, they can think of nothing else hardly but food. When a person is thirsty, we had a meltdown on the way to Missouri because Wyatt hadn't had a drink in 35 minutes. "Oh, I'm so thirsty, Dad. I'm thirsty. You got to pull over." No, son. Now, I want you to know, before this sermon this morning, I intentionally skipped breakfast so I could relate to the text a little bit more. I'm hungry. But, thirst and hunger are powerful forces. We have a friend, my wife and I have a friend that was on the TV show Survivor a few years back. And you watch shows like that, and they talk about how the $1 million, the prize, is right in their grasp, and they just can't take it because they want a Reese's peanut butter cup. And they give up. They just can't spend 3 more nights on the island or something like that. TV show contestants give up on these challenges because of hunger and thirst. It's a powerful, powerful force. And what I wonder is that our approach to righteousness, that we just give up that easy? Are we okay with not finishing strong? This describes a profound hunger that can't be satisfied with just a snack. We've got a lot of people that want to snack on Jesus. They don't want to fully taste. They don't want to fully take in all of Jesus into that. They just want to snack on him. This is a hunger that is going to endure this whole side of eternity. This is a real passion. It's just like hunger in a healthy person. A hunger for righteousness should be healthy for the Christian. It's an intense passion. Sometimes it's a painful passion. It's a passion that's a driving force. And it's a passion that's a sign of good health. Whenever I look around, I see Christians, and Haram, you can come back, brother. I look around in our world and I see Christians that are hungry for lots of different things. They hunger for many different things these days. In fact, you can go to the bookstore and you can read books. You can find books about how Christians have used the gospel to become more powerful. But they hunger for power. They hunger for authority. They hunger for success. They hunger for comfort. They hunger for emotions. They hunger for experiences. They hunger for education. They hunger for spirituality. They hunger for accomplishing momentous tasks in life. They hunger for happiness. But how many people hunger for righteousness? That's my question. How many people hunger for righteousness? It's important to remember that whenever Jesus speaks these words, he is talking to a society that knows firsthand what hunger is like. We don't really know what it's like to be hungry anymore. They understood hunger and thirst. Here in the Western world, we eat because it's time to eat. We don't eat because we're hungry. So whenever you try to apply these words to hunger and thirst for righteousness, if you've never truly been hungry, it's hard to understand. But Jesus promised to fill the hungry with a fullness that is both lasting and satisfying. It's a fullness that comes from knowing and experiencing Him. He'll fill us, and He'll fill us to the brim, family. It'll fill us in the moment, but it'll sustain us for the walk ahead. It gives us strength to carry on even as things are tough in our lives. So my question to you this morning is, are you hungry? Are you hungry for Him? Are you starving for Him? Are you thirsty for Him? Are you parched for Jesus? Is He everything that you want? When you come to Jesus and you say, I'm dry, I'm having to skip through some things here. I want to have a chance to pray here. But when you come to Jesus and you say, fill me, don't just stop there. There's always more. There's always more. Keep seeking Him. Keep hungering for Him. So here's my question this morning. Are we hungry? Or are we just wanting to snack on Jesus? A snack will not sustain you. We snack when we drive. But if you're going to get out and walk a hard path, you need to have a good meal. Would you stand with me this morning?